Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Legion Alpha video. Today I'm going to be giving you a run through of Darkheart Thicket. This is one of the new dungeons that is coming in Legion, and it's actually one that is really quite cool. As far as this video goes, I'm mainly focusing on the bosses. The trash here isn't super remarkable, so later on I'll be speeding up through that. But overall, what's this dungeon like? Well, as you can see, it's got a more of a nature theme, but with a lot of the Emerald Nightmare in there. In terms of how the trash pools feel, a lot of it feels kind of similar to the Everbloom, and that you end up having big, clusters of enemies, but there are a few times, like the one you can see now, where you are facing just a few sort of stronger trash mobs. Overall, though, pretty standard as far as trash mobs go, but it is a really, really cool instance visually, and that's something you'll see throughout this video. Anyway, let's hop on to the very first boss. So she is... well, she's simple enough, but yeah, pretty decent. Let's just go over the abilities. We've got Primal Rampage, so she hits the target for 400k, knocks them back, and then charges them. You just saw the boss do that there to the tank on the screen. Now, if you are standing in between, the knocked back tank and the boss, and then she jumps back to back to the tank, then you will be knocked back. So you just want to position yourself away from the tank. That's not something that I think will affect people much. We've then got Grievous Leap. So she leaps at an enemy, does 200k, puts a 30k per 3-second dot on the target. She just did that to me, actually. And that dot will persist until the target is healed above 90%. The boss then leaps back to original position and does the exact same thing. This is a little bit like on Dude Darmak, where he does his jump around the place when he's on his wolf mount. And then we've got Nightfall. You can see it just around the place. It's those void zones on the floor. They do 45k damage when you're in them, so don't be in them. This is really a simple enough boss fight. You probably want to stay a little bit more spread out so that you're not, so that everybody isn't getting completely whacked by every single ability multiple times. But other than that, it's simple enough. Of course, this is on normal mode. Heroic mode will likely have an additional one, maybe even 2 mechanics more per boss, because right now this is a pretty light boss, but I think it's actually quite a good boss. It's emphasizing movement, it's got stuff on the floor that you don't want to run into, which I think is, it's good to reinforce all those key things, and yeah, they've basically snipped out a few mechanics from Darmak, and that's really the feel I'm getting off it. Still, pretty darn solid boss though. So next, just before we go on to the next boss, I'm just going to show you some trash. So you go into this really swampy area that's kind of misty, really pretty beautiful looking actually. I love how they're really turning the kind of nature aesthetic on its head by having all this red corruption through it. I think it looks really nice. But you've got mobs like this one, who is, you could almost say, a miniature version of the next boss, in that he does 1 or 2 similar abilities that are kind of, a bit smaller. Let's move on to Darkheart though. He's the second boss of this instance, and he's got a few different mechanics. So then, Crushing Grip. He picks the tank up, squeezes him for 5 seconds, doing 70,000 damage per second. He then throws the target, and that does 120,000 damage to anyone in that area, so you probably don't want to be standing on top of people. Next, we've got Strangling Roots, and holy crap, I think I failed to this twice in this encounter, which is a little bit embarrassing. So roots emerge under nearby enemies, doing 45k damage every second, and rooting them, it says in the dungeon journal, for 1 minute, or until they are destroyed, but if memory serves, they just kind of disappeared on me. Yeah, but basically, if you see that appearing under you, move. Don't stand still like I did. That was really silly of me. Next, we've got Shattered Earth. This is an AoE around the boss that does 280k and knocks enemies back. Pretty simple, mainly something the melee players are going to have to deal with. However, I'd like to make the point that, right now we were scaled up to level 110, right? So most of us, there you go, you just saw me got hit by the roots. But most of us at this point have, say, 1 million health. So something like Shattered Earth is only doing 1/4 of your health. Now, this is a normal mode, yes, so I would expect that it wouldn't be super punishing, but in Heroic, I think something like that should be maybe doing half your health pool, and really being kind of scary, because that's the sort of ability that's decently avoidable. And then finally, we've got Nightmare Breath. 240k damage in a frontal cone, applies a 70,000 per 2-second dot for 6 seconds. Simply, the boss will, or the tank will tank this guy in a certain direction, and other players, they don't stand behind the tank. It's pretty simple. Face away from the boss. Overall, though, I think he's a pretty good boss, so yeah, another solid entry. Nothing super crazy. Mechanically, it's not that he's not really super unique, he's just a hodgepodge of other mechanics, but I think it overall works out well enough, and there's good causality to the abilities. And we move on to some trash. This is a slight example of some of the stuff that is maybe a bit more Everbloomish. Well, actually not this one particular. I think it, like, as an example here, you're getting lots of small little trash mobs. There is one area which just feels like you're back in the Everbloom, where the tank could accidentally pull loads and loads of different mobs, and we actually had one wiped that, which was a little bit unfortunate. You'll notice all these black whelps. So they spawn out of eggs that hatch if you stand near them. A little bit similar to, say, the Leroy Jenkins stuff from, well, I suppose mainly from back in vanilla, which, is obviously not really a thing anymore with Ubers being changed. But anyway, we move on to this boss here. Now you'll notice that he's surrounded by those eggs, and that very much ties into his main ability, which is Downdraft. Downdraft, which you will see in a bit, causes him to, in a G-Kun style, blast everybody outwards towards the outside of the room. Of course, there are eggs to the outside of the room, meaning that players will hatch the eggs, which means the tank will then have to deal with lots of stuff to mop up. So ideally you want to be popping, your Stampeding Roar or something like that when this ability goes off. We ended up not really having that, but that's the main mechanic. So we do have some other mechanics here. There's Vile Acid Breath. This is a frontal cone that does 150k damage every second for 2 seconds, and it reduces armor by 5% for 6 seconds. Essentially, it's something that really only the tank should have to deal with. As a regular player, you don't want to be standing in front of the boss, because then you are going to get hurt, and being hurt kind of sucks. We've then got Earth-Shaking Roar. The boss roars, causing cave-ins, which inflict 40k damage every 1.5 seconds. I didn't really find that to be much of an issue, though. I mean, 40k damage every 1.5 seconds, that in comparison to a health pool as large as what players have isn't really too much of a worry. So, I suppose that is the entire fight covered. Right now, we're just, continuing to kill the boss. Because all those trash mobs spawn in, this is a boss that takes a little bit longer to kill than some of the other ones. But overall, I think it's a really, really good fight. What I prefer is when Blizzard have fights which they maybe only have 1 or 2 major mechanics, but those mechanics really play into how the game is in a more interactive sense. So, that happens, and then everybody has to, muster their wits and actually deal with the problem. I like stuff like that a lot, and I also like bosses which involve a bit more movement, and they're kind of, kinetic, and there's impact to things. Their abilities actually affect the space in which you're playing, and on top of that, I really like it when the room matters to a boss fight, because so often we're just fighting, in a circular arena where nothing's really going on, but with this fight, the room matters because of all of those eggs that are around the place. So let's move on to some more trash. These are just some guys who are leading into this kind of like tree thing, I suppose, in Darkheart Thicket. Inside that tree is the Shade of Xavius, not actual Xavius. Unfortunately, there's some satyr mobs here. Again, though, the trash isn't really a problem. The only time that we die to the trash is when we pulled multiple, packs of them, and there was just too much, and, anyone would have died in that situation. This boss has quite a few abilities, so let's get through them. Festering Rip, 45k per 2-second dot that decreases healing received by 5% for 20 seconds. So that is something that your tank is going to have to deal with. It's probably worth mentioning, these numbers are taken off the dungeon journal on my level 101 character. It could be that they scale based on your level because these dungeons can scale, in which case, it's like 45k at level 100, maybe it's a good bit higher at level 110, but overall, it's a light ticking dot or whatever that has the main component of which is the decreased healing. So there's that going on. Feed in the Weak. This is a dot that does 75,000 damage per second for 5 seconds. We've then got Nightmare Bolt. Actually, you know what? Let's just cover Drain Essence, because that's what he's doing right now. Drains Malfurion's essence, fully healing himself and inflicting 60k damage every 3 seconds to all nearby players. You can almost see this as like an intermediate phase. So he does his regular abilities to the point where you've almost killed him. Then he does this, and then he goes back to the rest of the fight. So in this section, he's doing 60k damage every 3 seconds to everybody, and we can end this phase by quite simply just breaking Malfurion out of this thing that he's in at the minute. Anyway, let's get back to the other abilities. So there's Nightmare Bolt. This launches a bolt that does 150k damage and applies Waking Nightmare. Waking Nightmare causes the player to be pacified and silenced unless they are standing near an ally, and that plays into Induced Paranoia. Players affected by Induced Paranoia will take 250,000 damage and be feared for 5 seconds if they stand close to allies. So a lot of this fight is really surrounding, do you want to be close to your ally or do you want to be far away, based on whether you have Waking Nightmare or Induced Paranoia. We then also have Apocalyptic Nightmare, fire falls from the sky dealing 90k fire damage, which you can see shooting off from time to time. And of course, we're actually, I think, is that either Malfurion? I think Malfurion's using Trank at the minute. That's awfully nice of him. So this fight is, I think it's pretty decent. I mean, yeah, it's overall, I think, actually, no, it's a good fight. It's a good fight. Overall, I like this instance. It gets a solid thumbs up. It's got pretty cool bosses. Overall, just really quite enjoyable. And you can see right now I've got Induced Paranoia on me, so that means that I need to not stand close to allies. As for this dungeon overall, yeah, gets a thumbs up for me. What I want to look forward to, though, is Heroic Mode. I want to see how they add mechanics to this. You also notice I was playing this as an MM Hunter. Yeah, I still, dislike heavily how this class plays, because once you get to 3 stacks of vulnerability on your target, the gameplay and the decision making, everything ends. So I think they actually need to just scrap this and go back to the drawing board. So there's your downside, but the upside is it's a pretty cool dungeon and a solid entry. Anyway guys, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.